Okay, so I'm going to talk about this piece a little bit, get some words out of my body. It's not totally done. I've still got some clips here. This part's drying. I'm interested to see if because it dried crumpled in on one of these other places, and when I uncrumpled it, it had like a really interesting sort of map-like texture to it, almost like waves. I've also got this weird light here because I find that when the light comes from different angles, what are you doing? Ah, sure. So when the light comes from different angles, you can see it very well. It really highlights the shadows come out in a really interesting way. And I think that the texture becomes more interesting, and um, the see-through sections, the panels that are more interestingly visible, they come through. I don't know if you can really see that on there or not, but I just really like the way that that works, because when I turn this off completely, and I feel like it looks a lot more just like flat, kind of like trash hanging from the ceiling. So I'm aware that I want to really engage light intentionally. Yeah, look at that. You can see that? Oh, that's so cool. The way this is highlighted here. Oh, that's interesting. It's like right up in there. I wonder if I can, what does that look like? Oh, that's too much. Anyway, like I really want to, I like the way it engages with light and with motion. So I'm not sure how much I want to like incorporate a fan or some sort of motorized system with these pieces to just try to make sure that they are sort of constantly capable of moving. This one's more sturdy because it's hanging from 2 points instead of just 1 point. But the aliveness that comes from the motion, I think, is really interesting. So I was thinking about, let's see if I carry this around. With this piece, it's meant to be walked around all the way around. At first I was working on the wall because I couldn't figure out how to make it three-dimensional, but this structure I think is kind of interesting because it's originally a rectangle, which also these sort of more mild-mannered metal pieces down here. So you can like see through it in different ways. I'm not totally sure it's done, but we're working on it as it is right now. Anyway, that rectangular grid I think is interesting because I'm thinking about it as like the structure, the substructure underneath a map, underneath that conceptual concept of a map, where it's like this framework that's really sturdy. It's going to tell us where to go. It's going to tell us how to, feel safe, feel structured. But in this piece, all the color is literally springing off of it and running in opposite directions. All of the terrain, the geography, the history, the pressure is all escaping from the structure, which is kind of what I've been thinking about lately when it comes to maps. And I intentionally actually didn't attach any of those signifiers, those color pieces, the textile, to the back of the structure. It's all laying on the front and coming off in different directions and then wrapping up around underneath it. I don't know if it's super literal, but I was just thinking about the way that those maps that we have for ourselves, the information is all laid out on the top, on the surface. It's not a three-dimensional object. It's literally the most two-dimensional thing that you can have to navigate the most three-dimensional environment you can have. And they're opposites of that, how they conflict and how one tries to emulate the other, how the map is trying to emulate the terrain, how the flatness is trying to emulate the life in a way that's digestible and manageable, and giving information about it without actually experiencing it. Um, but then in this situation, it's just like this sort of jumping off and stretching and reaching and climbing and pulling away of all of that data, and it's becoming its own terrain. It's becoming its own experience. It's like trying to rebirth itself back into lived space. I was also just thinking about how process oriented this whole process is for me. Like making these is so tactile. The whole time I'm making them, I'm like, oh, like this sewing process is so much like living in life. Like I don't know where my needle is going to pop up next from underneath the thing because I can't see, or these paths that were made with the sewing machine end up getting ripped out, and you can sort of see little holes through from like these sort of echo paths when the light shines through those needle marks where there's no string in it anymore. You can see like the residue, the effect of having done something, like a memory. Um, it's actually really painful to do. Like I keep pricking my fingers, and just all of these sort of analogies to from the making to what I'm thinking about while I'm making it, how they connect so intimately. But then I'm like, but there's nobody that's gonna know that except for me. It's my responsibility as the artist, not just to have a personal experience when I'm making the work, but also to offer an object or something that the viewer engages with, that they themselves can have that kind of experience. Like if that's the point of the work, if the point of the work is for me to investigate how living life and map making correlate with each other, and how we or the we, like, are constantly in conflict or in contrast or in tension between the desire to live and the desire to know, and the wonderful, scary, mysterious experience of plotting our life forward and trying to make sense out of our life, but not really understanding where the next step is going to take us or where the needle is going to come up through the fabric. Like that is a very tactile, process-oriented thing that I'm having while I'm making it. But then when people look at it, is like, is that coming through? Is there any reason that a viewer would look at this and be like, oh yeah, I totally am thinking about the angst and agony and the fear and the exhilaration of living? I don't think so. And that makes me feel sad. It makes me question like how to relay those ideas more generously in the work. And maybe I can't. And maybe that's part of the like, I mean, I think I can. I'm still working on this, but like maybe that's part of what the artist talking part or writing, like the the coupled context, the text, the power of the artist talk. Like when I cold read a piece of art, I can get something out of it. But usually, given there's title information, there's a there's little tiny pieces of clues of information that offer context, and then sometimes there's big jumps of information, like listening to the artist talk or talking to them or whatever, reading about them, that then really like grabs and pushes home like what the purpose of the piece was. So I think when I just look at it, just bare straight up look at it, I think many of the interesting things is the three-dimensionality, the way the light runs through over it, creates shadows, dances with it, and also the movement. I think it feels suspended. I think it feels familiar. I mean, that blue one feels like a sheet. Like I can actually see the hem, the familiar hem on it and stuff. So I feel like there's a familiarity there. It's not too hard to imagine what some of the materials are. And some of the materials are very complex and foreign looking and looks like they required a lot of time to make, and that it's all jammed up next to each other. It feels organic. It feels heavy and light at the same time. I think it feels inviting in the sense of like being able to really investigate it and look at it from lots of different angles. And I think given the proper context, it wouldn't be hard to jump into terrain and mapping because there are a lot of cues, like the line sort of feels like very much like roads and the shapes feel very much like environments. I also don't want to go too literal with this. I feel like I keep being like, tell a story, but also like ask a question, tell a story, but don't make it so obvious that people are bored and like, blah, 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 which is what I appreciate about music, like it's telling a story, it's asking a question, it's inviting me to think about one very specific thing. Each song is a little nugget. It's not like trying to conquer the whole universe of humanity in one song. It's just like this song is about love. This song is about loss. This song is about happiness. And not even that generically. It's like this song is about how I feel about this one person right now in my life. This song is how I feel about losing this thing that I lost. So I think I have a tendency to go too broad and then beat myself up about being too broad. And then being afraid of being too specific, which in actuality, being more specific is more, I think, personal. And the more personal it is, the more universal it becomes. Yeah, I think I'm afraid of over designing it, like decorating with it. But I also know that like a general, like big amount of ugliness is going to defeat the purpose of finding it elegant. And I think that there is a deep elegance to destruction. I think there's a deep elegance to freedom, seeking freedom, jumping off of what we once knew into something new, transitioning the way that we see ourselves in our universe, reaching for things that might not be there, reaching for things you hope are there, and taking a good long look at where you are, where you've been, and what it means to have courage enough to think about where you might be going. But I like to hold it all very open-handedly. I feel like this is a snapshot. I feel like this is a snapshot of a moment of um, jumping, or like it's a jumping off moment. It's a moment of, but it's also a visual expression of what it looks like to have worked and worked and worked to dismantle yourself from the structure that limits. Like when I think about this, if I associate these colors and these textures to that structure, the amount of effort it would have taken to dismantle each layer and to grow. I mean, it's so much bigger than that original substructure is. So it's had to expand, it's had to reach, it's had to stretch, it's had to grow, it's had to dismantle itself, it's had to release itself. And now it's in this sort of plunge of, it's not even in a plunge, it's like a continuation of plunging, because it's already taken the plunge to try those first things. It's already removed itself as much as it can. And now it's still doing it. It's still going. And there's this levity. There's this breath of I am now bigger than the thing that used to make me what I was. And I am now holding space that defies logic and gravity. I'm building new structures for myself that are flexible and still sturdy. And yet, maybe I will never totally release that map structure. Maybe that system, it will always be there. There'll be some part of it that pulls me down, but maybe it also offers a little bit of gravity. Maybe the tension between these two things is just the way it's going to be. And that's probably not a bad thing. I think that's actually mandatory. The tension of the past and the tension of the becoming. Holding each other in space.